All right. So I think what we'll do at that point, I think we'll just go ahead and start with Arun. Make sure Arun's not is with us.
Thanks, Ron. Yep,
Oh, there he is. All right.
I'm here.
Huh, do I have you blocked?
Oh, I don't have my camera on. I've been having camera issues.
Oh, okay. I mean,
We could give it a try.
well, you're all right. You had it blocked, but I think it's. I suppose if you want to just give the presentation, that's fine. I have you. Yeah, I can't get you on, so.
I'm going to try my video. It's been
Oh,
hit or miss.
there you are. Where you're in
Okay.
now.
Okay.
Good.
Great. Well, thank you, Ron, and thank you, Nona, for setting this up. Quick update here on what's going on. First, the Hiawatha service. We had 2019 was a record year for Hiawatha ridership, 886,000 passengers. You know, when we first went to 7 round trips back in 2003, we were at like 300,000 something. So it's just been a phenomenal growth, and it's a really critical part of the transportation system, especially in Southeast Wisconsin, carrying thousands of people per day. But then COVID-19 hit, and ridership essentially went down to nothing, and we dropped. You know, just days after that started happening, we dropped to, and the pandemic situation was worsening, we dropped to a 4 round trip schedule for just a couple days, and then a complete suspension of service in March. We replaced the Hiawatha with bus services, Amtrak Thruway bus, serving all the Hiawatha stops, and that generated some ridership, maybe 20-ish people per bus, 10 to 20. But that, again, that was just that single round trip, an 8:05 a.m. departure in the morning, and a from Milwaukee, and a 5:08 p.m. departure from Chicago in the evening. Then we started developing a Hiawatha relaunch plan in late April, early May, working with Amtrak, 3-phased approach, going back to 1 round trip Hiawatha service on June 1st, and then going to phase 2 would be going to 4 round trips on June 29th, Monday, which is what we're going to be doing. And then the 3rd phase would be going back to the full 7 round trip service, and that's to be determined. So since we went to the 1 round trip on June 1st, we've been seeing roughly 50 to 75 people on each of the 2 trains, and which has been substantial. It's been it's been being operated with a 3-coach consist along with the table car. So now we are going to be on Monday going, as I said, to 4 round trips Monday through Friday. All of the peak trains will be restored, as well as a midday train and an evening train, and then 3 round trips on Saturday and Sunday. And this will run at least through September 30th at that schedule. The Interstate 41 Amtrak Thruway connecting bus service from Green Bay to Milwaukee will continue to operate a single daily round trip, connecting to Hiawatha trains to go to Chicago. The number of consists we'll be using, obviously, for 4 round trips and 3 round trips on weekends, will be going from the single consist now to a 2 train consist that we normally have on starting on Monday. All of the coach cars being used on the Hiawatha service have gone through an extensive refresh program that was completed back in February or March. And this means the Amtrak Horizon equipment still being used, but it's been refreshed with the new synthetic leather seat cushions that are larger and easier to clean. All equipment has been deep cleaned, and new carpets and walk-off mats have been added, as well as some new lighting around the restrooms and vestibule area. The Hiawatha 10-round trip project, I'll give you a little update on that. That is continuing with the rail capacity modeling ongoing, testing different infrastructure options in Illinois to replace those projects in Glenview and Lake Forest that were removed. The host railroads, CP Rail's consultant will be reviewing the simulation modeling of the WisDOT consultant, and hopefully this summer we will know where we stand in terms of agreement on alternative improvements to get that going. But in the meantime, we are taking incremental steps to build that out. And first, we had the Muskego Yard Freight Bypass of Milwaukee Intermodal Station project. That's fully funded. It's awarded, selected for award for federal grant this spring, and we're going through now the preliminary design and the grant requirements to FRA to get that grant agreement signed. Final design hopefully will start later this year, and we're going to have a public presentation posted mid-July on our website, which will have a Muskego Yard page with comments due by July 30th. Oh, we got a mosquito here. Sorry about that. We also have the Milwaukee Airport Rail Station second platform project ongoing, which is at about 30% preliminary design now. That was also a federal grant that we received last year. We're going to be having most likely an online public involvement or public information opportunity in August, similar to what we're doing for Muskego Yard. We have also the new equipment grant that we were selected for award. That's to purchase 6 coaches and 3 cabs to fully equip the Hiawatha service and add to the Midwest equipment fleet pool of single level Siemens equipment. So that is ongoing. And that we should start seeing new equipment on the Hiawatha later this year or early next year. And then this additional new equipment will be a few years after that.
Right. Could you wrap up now? We'll move on to Scott.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, wrap up. Okay, thanks. Yep. And then we have the state rail plan process starting soon. And please stay tuned for that as we're going to be doing outreach to stakeholder groups like All Aboard Wisconsin and ProRail for that. And then finally, last but definitely not least, the big news, Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago TCMC project, a CRISI grant, federal CRISI grant was submitted on June 19th by WisDOT on behalf of WisDOT and MnDOT for final design and construction of all of the improvements needed and implementation for the TCMC. That's going to be an extension of a Hiawatha, it looks like, and that complements a grant that we were selected for award in May, and that was for $12 million for the first 3 years of operation of the TCMC to reduce the state's operating payment. Very significant developments in the past month with TCMC. We've gotten support from Canadian Pacific, the host railroad. We have a letter of support from them in our application. We've gotten extensive legislative support and support from the business community and communities all across the state. It's really broad, impressive level of support that we've seen for that. The last big item to fall into place to ensure that happens is the Minnesota getting their bonding of 10 million. That's absolutely critical. And once that falls into place, then this project looks like it's a go. The Empire Builder, quickly from Amtrak. Amtrak is planning to reduce that to 3 days per week starting October 1st for most of FY21. WisDOT and MnDOT are looking into that now and figuring out what outreach to do about that. There is, just wanted to make everybody aware, there's a live interview with William Flynn, MIPRC CEO, on the Washington Post on Monday morning at, I believe, 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 Central.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Arun. I wonder if we can just move on then to Scott Rogers, who's our next speaker. And Scott is the gubernatorial appointee for Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, and also West Central Rail Coalition Chairman. So Scott, you want to go on?
Sure, thanks, Ron. If you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Ron and Nona asked me to introduce myself a little bit. The Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission is roughly the successor of the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative. It's a multi-state commission that was done through legislation. There's 4 people appointed from each state to the commission, and the states include some of the Midwest regional rail states like Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan, and Missouri, as well as Minnesota, and then Kansas and North Dakota are also represented. I'm also chair of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition, which is an organization that's been in effect since 1999 to get passenger rail service to the corridor between Eau Claire, Menominee, Hudson, and St. Paul. And then in my day job is I'm the Government Affairs Director at the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce. Just a few things about the MIPRC, which they asked me to talk about. This is a group that gets together to talk about common issues. The other gubernatorial appointee in Wisconsin is Dave Simon from the Wisconsin DOT. As you may know, Craig Thompson is the secretary of the DOT. We had a lot of contact with him over the years through the chamber. He came and spoke here quite a bit, knew of our interest in this area about passenger rail service, and about a year and a half ago, after the new administration came in and they needed to do some appointments, they called me and asked me if we'd be interested in being part of that. So we had a DC meeting last fall where we, the commission visited the Hill and talked about the upcoming surface transportation and reauthorization. The FAST Act expires in September, and these states wanted to make sure that there would be some continuing support and hopefully increased support for passenger rail service in our states. It's very bipartisan, particularly some of the states like Kansas and North Dakota have state legislators who are very involved. And it's an interesting group that has been concerned about making sure that we grow passenger rail service in this country. Some of the issues, besides the surface transportation authorization, they've looked at the Amtrak accounting issue and the information that comes to the states on what their charges are, that sort of thing. They've also been supporting Amtrak on its on-time performance issues. And then I do know that North Dakota and Kansas representatives are particularly interested in the Empire Builder and the Southwest Chief improvements. We also, have been chair of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition in recent years, but it has been around since 1999. One of the things I learned when I moved to Eau Claire in 2002 was that even though we were one of the first communities to lose passenger rail service in 1963, there's a lot of enthusiasm here for getting it back and for using it on an everyday basis. In fact, I think Jackie Pavelski's on this call, and when I moved to Eau Claire and got involved in the chamber in 2002 as a member, she was the government affairs director, and I found out there had been a group here started by some significant leaders in the community to look at getting passenger rail service here. And at the time, the effort was to get included in the maps. As you know, the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative was being advocated by Wisconsin as the lead state, and we weren't on the map. And so we worked to get included in the state rail plan, which we ultimately did. But as you know, Wisconsin did not actively look at increasing passenger rail service for a number of years. So about 4 or 5 years ago, we were looking at what was happening around the country and believed that perhaps a public-private partnership where you could combine things like station development, higher frequencies, some of the interest that has been becoming evident of private entities getting involved in passenger rail service. So Dave Christensen, who's also, I think, on the call, had just retired from Minnesota DOT. is from our area and came on as a volunteer executive director of an effort to put together a framework where we could seek out a private partner to see if we could take advantage of some of the public funding through the federal government as well, but also a private entity who would get in, keep costs low, and be market oriented as they tried to move forward. And so the recent development on that is we've been working with a company out of Chicago called Corridor Rail Development. The first step, Union Pacific has been cooperative with us in using their track between here and St. Paul. And the first step that they've asked us to do is to hire an engineering firm to do a track capacity and capital improvement study. And we are about to pull the trigger on that. Corridor Rail Development told us just this week that they have put their investment capital and financing plans together, and that they would be willing to fund that first step of getting that study done. So we'll look forward to that. And then Arun talked about the TCMC project, and that actually affects Eau Claire. He probably ran out of time, but one of the things that they're looking at doing with that additional train is to have shuttle connections, much like the I-41 service he talked about, but is done extensively in California, to some of the offline cities, such as Madison, Rochester, and Eau Claire from Toma. And so there's been a lot of interest in our community about that. Our chamber has sent a letter in support of that, as well as the Chrissy grant. We've also had our city council and our county board send resolutions of support. So we're excited about that being a tie into the Amtrak system, as well as working on a corridor from here to St. Paul. And I see I've already gone about 6.5 minutes. I've been running a timer, so I'd be glad to answer any questions when we get to that.
All right, we'll talk about questions at the end. Thank you very much. Is Andrew Selden in yet? I don't see him on my list here.
Ron, this is Andy. I'm on my wife's computer, so if you could bring back the video for Margaret Aldridge, I'll pretend to be Margaret today.
Okay, you pretend to be Margaret. All right, let me see if I can. There she is. Let's get you in there. There. Okay. Now you should. Huh. There you go. Okay, you're on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nona asked me to address kind of a recovery environment for Amtrak coming out of the COVID crisis. And I'll start by pointing out that, like almost all, or if not all, passenger transport providers, Amtrak was hit very hard by this. Their system-wide traffic levels fell about 95%, but it was not uniform. Some services were hit harder than some other services. As we know, the Acela Express trains quickly went effectively to zero. Some of the state-sponsored corridors went very close to zero. The Acelas were withdrawn almost immediately because nobody was riding them. And much the same was true of many of the state corridors, but not all of them. Some retained some of their ridership. The overall system average decline was 95%. But the one segment that was much better than the average was the long distance segment. The interregional trains retained about 85% of their ridership. 15% of their ridership. They were down 85%, which is, that's bad in absolute terms, but in comparative terms, they did really well in retaining traffic. So what do you do from that kind of a pit to try to rebuild ridership on a national network? I think there's two foundational elements to that. One is to build on strength, and the other is to follow the right metrics so that you're getting the most return on investment, however you choose to measure that. And the metrics that you need to look at, I think, in a rebuilding mode are retained ridership, retained sales, the number of intercity passengers that you're carrying, and especially the distances over which you're carrying them. Because if you're in an intercity passenger transport business, the most critical metric is annual revenue passenger miles. How much transportation are you actually providing? And you need to maximize the ratio of all of these important metrics to the number of dollars that you're spending in order to accomplish it. You want to get the most RPMs per dollar spent. You want to get the greatest market share in the corridors you're serving per dollar spent. And so far, the interregional services in the COVID crisis are outperforming the short corridors by significant margins. Retained traffic is 3 times greater than the short corridors. In the month of May, the national interregional trains had more than twice the passenger miles and revenues of the entire remainder of the system combined. We're starting to see in a handful of cases on the long distance trains, trains leaving initial terminals in sold out conditions. It's not widespread, but it's starting to happen. And that's being driven, we think, in large part by Amtrak's self-assumed 50% coach capacity limitation. The system is handicapped in its ability to respond to demand by adding capacity. There's a large number of superliner cars that are leased to California for Southern California corridor service. It'd be very hard for Amtrak to get those back in the near term. And I'll just add my comment that the plan to go at the end of the summer season to 3-day-a-week service is just the classic definition of insanity. That's been tried several times in the past. I don't know if current management even knows that. It has never worked. Each time long distance trains have been eliminated or cut in frequencies, the following year the system's deficit and subsidy need went up, not down. But I guess we'll have to learn that lesson again. At the same time, Amtrak is charging ahead with purchasing the new Acela 2 train sets, which is a $2 billion exercise. Those trains are intended for use in the Northeast Corridor, where the business has gone for business traffic as close as you can get to zero. Personal travel is there, but it's light. And we have no investment at all planned for replacing the 40-plus-year-old superliner fleet. So it's a difficult proposition because management is focused on their short corridors where they get ridership numbers. We think that that's reflects a lot of political pressure from members of Congress from the Northeast who care a lot about Amtrak because of the impact that it has on commuter traffic along the Northeast Corridor. We think it's also based on Amtrak's use of their Amtrak Performance Tracking System, which is a Rube Goldberg cost allocation system that they either think or represent to others as being a reflection of the financial performance of the different trains. It's not. APT is not a financial accounting system. It's not compliant with generally accepted accounting principles. And because of that, it's incapable of and does not report the financial results of operations of these different trains. So it's giving false information to management. And if Mr. Flynn thinks that cutting back long distance trains to 3 days a week, he's going to avoid losses, he's badly mistaken. But as I said, we'll probably have to learn that lesson again. Long-term, trains that are positioned for single purposes or largely single purposes, such as business traffic, like the Acela Express, are going to have a very long, hard slog to rebuild any business at all. Trains that are positioned purely for tourist traffic, we can look in Canada at Rocky Mountaineer or VIA's mostly tourist trains like the Canadian or the Ocean to Halifax are also discontinued through the summer. Tourism is almost non-existent. The one set of trains that we know are doing well because they're general purpose trains. They seem to cater to people doing all kinds of travel, from business travel to family business to tourism, are the interregional trains that Amtrak operates. By a huge margin, they're the strongest trains we've got. In a rational world, if we were trying to rebuild intercity rail passenger service, that's where we would start. Amtrak seems to be doing it backwards. Ron, that's my report.
Good. Well, I really hate to interrupt these. These talks really seem interesting. I mean, we should have had a lot more time, I think, for all of these. I really appreciate your input on this and the fact you were able to cut this short for me, because we will try.
When Nona invited me to participate in this and said, "And you get 5 minutes," I kind of laughed. I said, "Okay, you'll get headlines. You won't get thoughtful analysis."
Yeah, that's one of the problems. You just get into stuff that I'm really interested in hearing, and then I got to cut you off. So
Thank you.
The way things go. Thank you very much. Well, our next person on is Gary Goyke. Now, Gary is in there.
I unmuted myself. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Can you hear me, everybody?
I saw you there.
All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. This is a great effort. I am going to, following me are two gentlemen that have been involved in a lot of our activities, and I'll say a little bit about them and then I'll stick to my report. One of the things that we have done, and Karl Schulte will explain more, is a couple of months ago, through the efforts of All Aboard Wisconsin and others, we formed a COVID-19 transportation task force. And we have had, as a result of this, and Ron, I am a big fan of Diana Moss, who is the Wisconsin Department of Transportation legislative liaison, and Ian Ritz, who handles a lot of the transit-related issues. We have talked about passenger rail on this, and within our group, we have Andy Hauck, Nona, and Dave Muma are members of this 34-member transportation COVID-19 task force. We have worked with some of our national partners because the issues, as Karl will explain, the health issues are very similar with a train, a passenger rail car, and a Greyhound bus or a municipal bus. So I just want to thank the department for allowing us to use their phone line and for the meetings we've had. We have had 4 conference calls. 3 of the calls are been with DOT. 2 of the calls of those 3 have been with the FTA. We will be doing another call. It won't be related to passenger rail as much as non-emergency medical transportation. We formed quite a coalition. For those of you who know me, know I believe strongly in 3 things, and our coalition reflects that, and that is cooperation, communications, and coordination. And that's where we fit into that. Arun is a major player at DOT, and therefore they all have to work together on these things. And this is very strictly related to the effects of the virus on transportation. I also want to thank WISARP. All Aboard Wisconsin is registered to lobby. And we have a committee as part of us that was funded through the efforts of Andy Hauck and his SMART team. We have a Wisconsin Freight and Passenger Rail Committee, which looks at issues that can best be described as one rail. So, many of you know that philosophy of trying to work with the freight rail companies. We have succeeded. We have invited the first-class railroads to some of our meetings, but I wanted to thank WISARP, which prepares an incredibly good newsletter, which is used by us very faithfully, publication after publication. Either Nona or Clark or I or Dave Muma go to the basement of the Capitol and those get delivered. I have had at least a dozen legislators say they love that newsletter, and it is, I just want to thank them for doing that. Also, we believe in communicating in the Capitol. So in the last year, in August of 2019, we held a briefing in the North Hearing Room of the Capitol, some 60 people were there. Terry Brown even talked about the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago issues. And then in March of 2020, before the virus shut everything down, we did a legislative day in the Capitol. So we are politically involved, just so you all know. That's our goal. I'm glad to see Scott on the call. Senator Miller was honored, and I'm glad to see that committee, that commission continuing. Very, very important for all of us. We also honored Ed Brooks, a Republican from the Baraboo area who passed away, and we work very closely with the members of the transportation committees in the legislature. I want to point out a couple of things and then be cognizant of the time. These are observations of mine. They are about what we're in right now. This is a very, very difficult political time. There are 86 competitive assembly races in the state. Each one of them is filled with some of the most vile messaging back and forth between supporters of various candidates. It is pretty ugly out there in the field. And so we have to be very careful to stick to the merits of the issue. But I wanted to point out a few things that I think are impactful.
You're at 5 minutes.
I was called by a group of people years ago. I chaired the education committee. I am happy to say that Governor Tommy Thompson, this is a factor, will be taking over as president on an interim basis, although the internship will last more than a year and a half. He is moving into the chancellor's house in Madison. And of course, remember, he was chairman of Amtrak. And I had a chance to talk to him and say, some of your campuses formed committees that dealt with student transportation and the need for passenger rail to some of the campuses. All Aboard Wisconsin's first community forum was held in kind of a jail area of the Sheriff's Department, Winnebago County, and the university sent 2 people there who talked about the need for students to have better transportation. Secondly, you should know that our Governor Evers and Governor Walz of Minnesota are good friends, that they had developed a relationship before either of them became governor. Please keep that in mind because they have mentioned it to me time after time, a couple of times. You have the emergence of Ron Kind as a member of Congress who is taking a far more active role. And because of the spread of his district, almost all the way up to St. Croix, all the way down to La Crosse, his level of interest in rail has gone up, and he has communicated with our office about supporting bills in Congress. He's taken a far more active role in this. And finally, I want to mention, as we will coordinate with campaigns and educating legislators, again, using those newsletters and other information that people, that all of you have been involved in, like Mark Quam and others, is that the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, is a candidate for president. And of course, there are many people who think of him and think of Amtrak in the same mind. So those are all factors that are seeping into this, but we will continue to be very active in educating and informing our friends in the legislature. Karl will explain the role and some of the topics that the committee has done. And Andy Hauck, of course, SMART is on our board of directors. They are a very active partner in this, and they are impacted by all of this tremendously. So I'm glad that they could join the call today, Ron, and I'll stop there, and you can go to the next person.
All right. Thank you very much, Gary. Our next person is Andy Hauck. I think Andy is on there.
Good morning. I'll just speak of the general state of the railroads, the freight railroads. Things are not great. Traffic is down about in excess of 20%. We have over 400 furloughs of the people in our group in the Smart Transportation Division, and it's about equal on the locomotive engineer side. Precision schedule railroading, especially on the Union Pacific, has greatly impacted service. They've got terrible problems in the Butler area. Union Pacific Railroad is also in negotiations with Metra in the Chicago region. And the Union Pacific actually borrowed money to kite up their stock price. So the board of directors is on pretty thin ice over the Union Pacific. They're absolutely broke. I don't know if they're going to be able to pay the freight because things are really in rough shape.
Wow.
Just in Wisconsin alone, Verso Paper has announced in Wisconsin Rapids that they're shutting down. That's 900 jobs, so that's going to murder the CN and the former Chicago Northwestern, now Union Pacific, in the Wisconsin Rapids area. And High Crush Sand has decided to declare bankruptcy. They're in negotiations now. Our big push now is the Invest Act that was introduced in Congress. It's going to go to the floor here by the 30th. So we're looking forward to working with that. It's about 800 pages, and there's a great deal of things in there for transportation in general.
Okay.
Yeah, I kept it under 5 minutes.
Very good. Gets us back on time. Thank you very much. Enjoyed your presentation. The next speaker is Karl Schulte. I believe he's still muted. You could.
I think I'm unmuted now.
There you go.
Hello, good morning, and thanks to you, Ron, and thanks to Nona and everyone else who helped organize this. I'm reporting today for the COVID-19 task force, like Gary announced, and I hope to do what Gary needs me to do here. The task force was put together to include as many transportation users and stakeholders as we could get involved. We include the transportation users, transportation providers, representatives from entities such as county governments who rely on us to transport their clients. We are representing and including taxi cab operations, limousine operations, specially equipped medical vehicle operations, small inner city bus lines, and of course, rail advocates and the rail industry. Aside from the rail industry itself, these other providers are often the first mile and the last mile for rail trips. We're often providing those first miles and last miles. We also, our clients are often people who don't own automobiles. So their interests also align with the health of the passenger transportation in the rail industry. I'm going to report very quickly and very briefly on what happened to us this spring, what our industries are doing to stay safe, keep our workers safe, and keep our passengers safe, and then what we need for the future. So this spring, we were hurt hard, of course, by the pandemic. We were declared, all of us were in this type of passenger transportation, were declared essential industries, so we kept offering service. But in late March and April, our volume, our passenger counts fell to about 20% of regular. Of course, we're private industries mostly. None of us can cover overhead when we're only collecting 20% of anticipated revenue. In May and in June, we've seen passenger counts creep back upwards. We're now happy to be at 50% of what we otherwise would have anticipated. So of course, 50% is still very meager and puts us in a precarious situation as private industries. It's a welcome trend. We are still depending on programs such as the CARE Act to keep us able to stay healthy, to stay viable operations. What did we do? Why did we stay open? Well, in every community, there's a number of people, scores of people who for one reason or another cannot drive. We took them, as we always do, to grocery stores and to pharmacies and to do their other absolutely essential life activities. Secondly, the essential workers themselves, hospital workers, clinic workers, in every community, we were transporting those persons to and from their very essential jobs. Because we were open for business, we adapted our businesses and started to offer transportation of packages of food and things like that for people who remained in their homes. We especially developed in most communities, we developed very close relationships with food pantries. Many food pantries were doing drive-through service, but of course there's a great many people in every community who don't drive for one reason or another. So we coordinated with the food pantries to be the delivery service for them. What did we do then to keep ourselves, our drivers safe, and our passengers safe? Well, that's the task force came together to help us knit together a very good list of best practices. We were getting our sources. We were all, as individual business people, we were reading from the CDC and from the FDA. We were reading best practices, but it all needs a little translation to be meaningful to drivers and dispatchers. So we took items like stay 6 feet away from others, and we added to that. But when you cannot stay 6 feet away from others, such as when you have a customer in a car or in a minivan, wear a mask. So we were just constantly looking for ways to make the general rules that everyone's been following more meaningful and applicable to the specific industries that are providing these essential transportation services.
Wrapping.
Sorry?
No, just start to wrap up. That's fine. Thanks.
Very good. So what do we want? Well, in our list, we've been communicating as a task force with DOT and with DHS. What we need is decontamination stations for publicly used vehicles in our cities. We need the DOT to help with that. We need masks to be mandatory for people utilizing mass public transit. We need we believe every community should have a set-aside vehicle, a public transport vehicle set aside for people who are at higher likelihood of actually carrying the disease, so we don't contaminate other equipment. I think it's a sensible list of requests. The task force has put that together in a way the DOT's heard us, and we're waiting on responses. That's my report.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'd like to do is we can get everybody on board here. Now we're hoping you get a little bit of time at the end. I was looking at questions people have asked. We have a question from Cindy Catt. We hear the Republicans cry about subsidizing trains and buses, but we subsidize airlines and highways. How do we make comments? Somebody want to respond to that question about making comments for?
Use the data.
The best thing we can do is contact our political representatives, particularly those in Washington, but even our local people, and let it be known that we support rail. I want to point out that Scott shared as a chat how we can watch or get on the interview, the Amtrak interview with the Amtrak CEO, Bill Flynn. So if you look in your chat list, you'll see a link for that. In case people missed it, I want to point out that that's there.
There's also the question from Scott to everyone, basically. It's a question for Arun, I guess. Has Amtrak reached out to the states regarding its planned October reductions? In addition to the national network trains, their announcement also mentions reducing state-supported services. Did you want to respond to that, Arun?
Sure, yes. Yeah, they have reached out. It's been pretty collaborative in terms of the state-supported. When they say that, when they mention reductions in state-supported service, that's reductions that have been agreed upon with the respective state and Amtrak. So they've come up with a plan, and that's what that's referring to. On the long distance, they did do some outreach to us on that as well, but not really very much in advance. We knew that was a possibility. We are very concerned about it, especially as it pertains to Wisconsin communities, and we're looking into that with Minnesota as well.
Okay, and we have another question from.
Ron, can you tell us when you would expect to hear about that Chrissy grant that you talked about?
Yeah, I would probably August or September. FRA typically wants to get those selections out before the end of the federal fiscal year, which is September 30th. August would be ideal, of course, but it could be September.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Nona also mentioned that Mark Quam has a comment to make. He's got Jim's iPad.
Yeah, I can just answer any questions. Basically, Minnesota needs to get their bonding bill passed for the second train, and I know Arun just mentioned briefly touched on that. Unfortunately, right at the moment, nothing's been done yet, and I think the Minnesota legislature may go into a special third session meeting, and at this point, yeah, the money it's not been approved. So I guess we'll stay tuned, but hopefully something will come out of that. But that's basically what I have for updates with Minnesota.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Sure.
You have any more comments to make, Nona?
Well, I just want to thank all our speakers. I thought it went very, very well. I'm looking forward to getting some responses back from people who watched the recording to see if they enjoy it, because we did have people who couldn't be on today that did request that, so that's why we recorded it, and we will get that information out. If you have other questions, you can contact Ron or myself or Gary or any of the speakers, I'm sure. I can, if you need any information, my email is nonaghill@gmail.com. Actually, it should have been on your invitation for this meeting. So, but I just wanted to remind you that we would certainly contact speakers if you have other questions that you think of later to get the answers to you. We would probably plan to do something with fewer speakers in the future and look into these things in depth. I think we had a nice response today. This is as many people as we get for a live meeting. So I think that's an excellent turnout, and I want to thank you all for participating.
Hey, Nona, could I just add a comment?
Sure.
Just sort of an update. I know Andy brought up the INVEST Act that the House is going to act on next week. And this relates to the reduction in national network trains and so forth. I did listen in on a Rail Passengers Association webinar they did on Wednesday. It was primarily on the front range service, but they spent some time updating people on what's happening with the national network threat. And there is a very active effort in Congress to try to roll that back and work. The INVEST Act itself, if it were to pass and they were to do the appropriate appropriations after it, would help solve that. But if it doesn't, and that's still a big question because the Senate hasn't acted on surface transportation, and there's some pessimism because there isn't much bipartisanship right now other than on the COVID issues. But they're also working through the appropriations process. And then both senators from Montana are circulating bipartisan letters asking Amtrak to actually be more specific about what they meant by needing more support, because they actually just said, we're going to do this. And they've never said, well, if we had this much support, we wouldn't have to do it. So there are some efforts in Congress. So it probably is worth your contacting your own congressman and both senators in the near future, particularly because of the threat to the Empire Builder.
So Scott, what would the ask be if we were to contact our congressman? What would our ask be?
And Andy might have a suggestion on that, but it would be to express concern that, Andy Selden also talked about it, that the national network reductions are really not a good idea, and they haven't given a plan for what do they really mean by increase in demand to restore them. Since once you reduce it to 3 times a week, how do you've already destroyed the market, so how does it come back? RPA, if you go to their site, has some good things. They actually have an action center there, and they use voter voice, which you can actually enter your own message, and then it'll send it to your senators and congressmen. So you might go to the Rail Passengers Association site, and that'd be the easiest way to get a comment in, or call the switchboard, ask for your office, and just say you're concerned about the reductions to Amtrak, because they're basically counting. Gary or Andy might have a comment on this, but they're basically counting how many people contact them. So you don't have to make the whole case. They just need to hear from you.
Nona,
Thank you.
may I say that in the case of the Empire Builder in particular, we have empirical experience. There's a history on this. About 30 years ago, Tom Downs, I think foolishly implemented a recommendation from Mercer Consulting to reduce the frequency of the Empire Builder to 4 days a week. And it was immediately recognized once they did that it was a financial disaster. The revenues went away. They lost more than the proportional amount of revenue. The cost did not go away anywhere near proportionally. It was just a complete fiasco. And the Empire Builder was brought back to daily service within a year. And it took about a year beyond that for the traffic to come back. I won't call that a snapback, but it did come back it recovered fairly quickly. And given that empirical experience, and then you've got the even stronger empirical experience of 1979, when 4 long distance routes were eliminated altogether, when the financial effect was that the following year, Amtrak's corporate loss and subsidy need went up, not down, that it makes you wonder, what are these people thinking? They've done this before, it's never worked. Why did they think it's going to work this time?
I couldn't have said it better myself, Andrew. Thank you. We all remember those days, or those of us that were there remember them. And it didn't work before, and it's not going to work this time. Also, I want to remind everybody, tell your families that live outside of the states you live in, because the long distance trains affect many, many people, and they need to contact their representation as well.
Well, I would say I appreciate everybody showing up for this meeting. I think we did have a good turnout. I was a little disappointed that the time slots had to be so short, because everybody had things that I really wanted to hear more of. I'm sure everybody wanted to talk more.
Yeah.
But that's the only shortcoming that I see right now. I thought we had a very good set of presenters. It would be nice to talk to them a lot more, though. I know this is just a snippet of what is really happening out there. And hopefully we can get more people talking about the problems. Also, how are we going to rejuvenate this public transportation system in Wisconsin as we overcome these problems with social distancing? I really appreciate all the people that showed up for the meeting, and I'm very thankful for all the presenters that came and actually allowed me to cut them short. I know they all had other things they wanted to say. I did want to hear more, and I have a tough time interrupting somebody when they're saying something that I really want to hear more of. But we managed to keep it fairly well on time. Obviously, we've gone a little bit over now with some of the questions, but I think we should try doing this again. I like Nona's suggestion that perhaps we'll do this in the future with fewer speakers. Maybe we'll have more of these, like a monthly meeting, but have 2 speakers instead of having as many as we did, and try to keep it to an hour though. So I appreciate everybody showing up. My address, I don't know if I had it on my invitation. It's rwwolfe@yahoo. I have recorded this, and if you would like a copy of the recording, you can contact me. It still has to be interpreted right now, so it'll be on my computer though, but I can send it to you. Okay.
Thank you.
If anybody else,
Everybody.
anything else they'd like to cover before I close out though?
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Good.
Oh, that was phenomenal.
I thought it was very informative.
Yeah, that was terrific.
Glad you could join us.
All right. Well,
On a side note, Nona and Gary, I sent you our links to our Legislative Action Center.
Yep.
That's got links where you can directly address the Invest Act with your legislators. It takes 2 minutes.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Talk to you later. Goodbye.
I think I have to put more money in.
That's right.